Hey, what you reading for?
Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel where I talk about books, literary, horror, classics, and contemporary. Boy, am I excited for today's video. I read The Night of the Hunter by Davis Grubb, and it is amazing. My first 5-star read of the year. And I'm quite stingy with my stars. To give you an idea, last year in 2023, I had five-star reads, and that is out of 84 books. So a 5-star read for me is rare, but this book is definitely deserving of it. And I'll get into what I love so much about the book in a bit. But first, I want to walk you through the experience, how I came about deciding to read this book. A few months ago, I was in the middle of a 10-part, I still am actually, in the middle of a 10-part video retrospective of horror from the 1980s, where I go year to year, pick out 3 titles and read them with fresh eyes and make a video giving my opinions of them. So I'm doing research as to what books to read for 1982, and I come across this title, Ancient Lights by Davis Grubb. And it sounded interesting. I go onto Goodreads, and there were only 3 reviews for this book, which is strange for a book by such a famous author. And the name Davis Grubb did ring a bell because The Night of the Hunter, his first book, was a huge hit. I'd occasionally come across The Night of the Hunter on lists of best books of the 20th century, or scariest books, best horror books even, though I'm not sure I would call it a horror book. We'll get to that later. There was also a famous movie adaptation that I would also come across on best of lists. So I was familiar with the title, I was familiar with the name, but the book never made it onto my TBR until I'm researching books for the 1982 edition of this 80s horror retrospective. I come across Ancient Lights by Davis Grubb. Hey, that's the guy who had the big hit. I look at the reviews, they seem interesting, so I get the book and start reading. And wow, I was very impressed by the writing. It's definitely not a horror book, Ancient Lights. Not by any stretch of the imagination, but I was so impressed with the writing that I decided to pause the horror retrospective and spend a week or so with Ancient Lights. And by the end, I was really, really impressed. It was unique, clever, witty, creative. The writing is gorgeous and inventive. And I said to myself, wow, who is this Davis Grubb? And if he writes this well, I need to check out what else he put out, right? So I decided I'd go back and check out his first book, his big hit, The Night of the Hunter. And that's how I came about to read this brilliant novel. The Night of the Hunter is a short book. It's around 250 pages or so. It was first published in 1953, and it was an instant hit. Now, what I loved about this book in particular were firstly the writing. The writing is beautiful. The imagery, the illusions and similes, also the dialect that he uses, it just created a beautiful and immersive experience. The setting, it's a rural America along the Ohio River during the Depression era of the 1930s. The narrator, it's written in third-person omniscience, so we get multiple perspectives. We get perspectives from children with their wide-eyed wonderments, their irrational yet instinctive fears. We get the perspective of the villain, his boiling hatred, and his efforts to contain that hatred and his conniving manipulation. We get the river folk and their common sense thinking and superstitions. In addition to being a beautiful read, it's tense and in some instances scary. How the children are afraid of shadows and the sounds and the wind. They know there is a greater threat beyond that, but they can't quite comprehend that threat, so they confront the shadows dancing on the wall. And that was very effective in setting the mood and giving us a glimpse into the frightened mind of a child. In addition to being tense and scary, it's also a touching story. We are talking about people during the Depression, people experiencing intense hardship and conflict, and having to search for humanity in a world that has reduced humans to scavengers and vultures, often, but not always. The plot, I'd rather not tell you too much about the plot. I'll give you the setup as we get it in the first chapter. A man by the name of Ben Harper, he is in prison waiting to be hanged. He robbed a bank and inadvertently killed 2 people during the robbery. And his cellmate, a man who goes by the name Preacher tries to cajole Ben Harper into telling him what he did with the money from the robbery. And Preacher is in prison for petty theft, I believe, but he's guilty of a whole lot more that the authorities don't know about. He's an evil man. He has the word love tattooed on the fingers of his right hand and hate tattooed on his left. And he weaves and twists his fingers together when he preaches about love and hate and sin and salvation. He's a deeply disturbed individual, but he's a man with a certain charm and charisma too. Now, Ben Harper never tells Preacher what he did with the money, but Preacher is convinced that Ben's small children, a son and a daughter, he's convinced that they know where the money is. So when he gets out of prison, his plan is to go and pay those children a visit and work his charms and his charisma to try to get them to tell him where the money is. And if that fails, he has other skills he can use to get that information from them. This book is shelved under many different genres, classics, horror, crime, thriller, noir, mystery. It's not a mystery. But I do see also in many reviews that refer to it as a Gothic or Southern Gothic. Southern, yes, but I don't think it checks enough for the Gothic boxes to be called a Southern Gothic, in my opinion. I try to think of a books I could compare it to, and I'm reminded of Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House and Ray Bradbury's Something Wicked This Way Comes. Both of those books live in the horror universe, but they both have high literary qualities, which I think is true of The Night of the Hunter. Even though there aren't any supernatural elements in Night of the Hunter, it's still paced a bit like a horror novel, and it's quite intense and scary at times. And it does have high literary merits. I think maybe the reason it doesn't get talked about so much is that it's a tough book to categorize. I think perhaps it might be too scary to have a broad appeal to literary readers, and it might be too literary to have a broad appeal to horror readers. Maybe that's why it doesn't get talked about that much. And even though there aren't any supernatural elements, it's debatable as whether it's a horror book. I do think it's scary enough, and it's definitely good enough that I would feel comfortable recommending it to horror readers. And it's definitely literary enough that I would be comfortable recommending it to literary readers. In fact, I'm going to recommend this book to my snobby friends who don't read horror. See if that pushes them down the slippery slope of the scary, right? Here's a glimpse of what other readers have to say about The Night of the Hunter. On Goodreads, there are 323 reviews. 43% are 5-star reviews. Here are some excerpts. Loosely based on the true story of serial killer Harry Powers, seriously, those little hairs on the back of your neck will stand on end when you read about this creepiest of all villains. If he is evil personified, then Widow Rachel Cooper is an angel in disguise. I won't tell you her role in the novel because I don't want to divulge too much of the plot. I will say, however, that this lady rocks. And from another reader who echoes my sentiments, good gracious, I feel the satisfaction of having discovered a hidden treasure. If not hidden, a neglected, forgotten one. Davis Grubb. Who knew? Davis Grubb's Night of the Hunter is usually described as a classic horror thriller. However, it is really more in line of the dark rural tales of Flannery O'Connor and Carson McCullers. Grubb's talent is in combining the dark reality of rural America of the Great Depression with the modern suspense of a Richard Matheson. Add the fact that Grubb eschews quotation marks, and you could call him a precursor to the equally dark Cormac McCarthy. It's funny that the reviewer should mention Cormac McCarthy, because I'm tempted to describe this book as a cross between Blood Meridian and The Grapes of Wrath. Or maybe Huckleberry Finn meets The Terminator. So this was my second experience with Davis Grubb after Ancient Lights, and both experiences were highly rewarding. So when I find an author that I really like, I get a bit compulsive about it, and I have to read everything they put out. So in 2024, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through the complete catalog of Davis Grubb novels. He only put out 10 novels, so it's quite a manageable amount to get through. What I'm going to do is I'm going to go in chronological order from the date of their publications. And for each month, I'll just read the next one in his catalog, right? Which means that in February, I will be reading his second novel, A Dream of Kings, which is a historical fiction set during the American Civil War. So if you would like to join me on my journey of discovering this amazing writer's catalog, what I'm going to do is I'm going to begin reading A Dream of Kings in early February, and I'll post my video review at the end of the month. So that will give you some time to catch up and read The Knights of the Hunter if you haven't already. Or, I mean, you don't have to follow me on the entire journey of his entire catalog. This is one of those hop on, hop off bandwagons with plenty of room. So you're welcome to join me on this adventure that I am excited about. Do you have any experience with The Night of the Hunter or any titles by Davis Grubb? Have you seen the movie? Should I see the movie? Do you have any idea why I don't hear Davis Grubb being recommended more? Or do you have any idea why it took me so long to discover him? I always enjoy hearing from you in the comment section. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to this channel. I do appreciate the support. Thank you for watching. I'll see you at the next video.